Welcome everyone back to ACSA Insights, and this is really the pinnacle of where we're at because this is our last in the series of AI in education, and what a fabulous journey it has been. And we are so lucky to have our guest today, which is Leon Furze. I would first of all like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners from the lands and the waterways from where we are meeting today. I am working and living and learning on Whadjuk Noongar land here in Perth. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and for their continued guidance, knowledge and support to the education of all Australians. It gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome Leon, who is an international consultant. He's an author and a speaker with over 15 years of experience in tertiary and secondary education. He is currently studying for his PhD in the implications of generative artificial intelligence on writing, instruction and education, which is, wow, quite a long title there. He's held multiple roles at different levels of school and board leadership. He's a non-executive director on the board of Young Change Agents and Reframing Autism. He's also a member of council for the Victorian Association for the Teaching of English. Now, in 2016, he completed his Master of Education at the University of Melbourne and went on to publish dozens of books, ones especially on practical reading strategies and practical writing strategies, which reached an international audience. And his latest book, which we'll refer to later, is exceptional because it's looking at AI. Now, if you have the pleasure of following him on LinkedIn, you will have been blown away at his dedication to high quality research, worldwide understanding of the implementation of AI in education. So welcome to the podcast, Leon.
Thank you very much. That all sounds very impressive, doesn't it, on paper?
Well, I think that is, and that was a shortened version because I was very impressed with some of your things, Leon. Yeah, it was.
Don't get ChatGPT to write a bio.
No, I didn't. I was very good. Now, just the first question off the bat, I talked a bit about your work in terms of your publishing of books. And I think your latest one is a really highly acclaimed book, which is Practical AI Strategies. Can you tell me a little bit about how it came about, and what are some of the highlights that teachers could take away and implement in their classrooms?
Yeah, so I've been writing books for teachers now for a few years, as you mentioned, reading and writing, first of all, which is my wheelhouse. I was an English and literature teacher for the most part. And back in 2022, I decided to leave the classroom and go into consulting and PD work full time. The intention was to do literacy. And then a couple of weeks after I handed in my notice at the school in May, I had a conversation with Lucinda McKnight, who I know you've also spoken to.
Yes.
She and I knew each other from the Victorian English Teachers Association Council and other places. And she said, look, there's a full-time PhD open in artificial intelligence. Actually, it was just in digital writing broadly.
Okay.
She said, the caveat is obviously you couldn't do it if you were teaching. And I said, well, actually, I've just handed in my notice. So this is good timing. And so I applied for that and was successful in that application. I started the PhD in generative AI, digital writing technologies in November. And then a couple of weeks later, ChatGPT came out and just sort of blew everyone up. So really good timing on that front.
Yeah.
But what it meant was that, from around about May, June, when I wrote the PhD application through to ChatGPT's release, I was already doing a lot of the reading around the technology.
Yeah.
And at the time, generative AI wasn't really a term.
Yeah.
It was automated writing technologies, and we had GPT-1 and 2 had been released from OpenAI, and BERT from Google a few years earlier. But they were really sort of janky, clunky technologies that didn't work very well. And we were saying, in 3 to 5 years' time, this will probably be good. And then ChatGPT came out and it was really short in that horizon. So, I had a lot of the background of some of the ethical concerns that I've written about, but also was quite well prepared when ChatGPT was released. So a lot of the early drafts of that book were written in early 2023 when most people were still frantically running around.
Yes, trying to get into that space. No, that's really interesting because, we talk about this a long time. And I don't think people realize that AI has been around for such a long period of time. And it is used every day, all the time. I talked about this the day with someone, but the fact that when Coles tells you your orange juice is out of stock and here's a variety of different variations, you're using that every day in your kind of the general, when you're going to the doctors, and how much AI is being used in that context for, look, and even when we had COVID, graphing and all that sort of thing was being done through AI strategies. But I think, as you're saying, that release of ChatGPT sort of blew it into the main problem, seeing what happened. So it's very interesting seeing that develop and how quickly. I think in a lot of times the hysteria has come with it, as opposed to an understanding. That's the lag behind it. Now, you are absolutely brilliant at your social media posts, because I love engaging, because you really do engage at such high level. And I don't know how you go around so much, because you cover so many bases. But one of your recent ones was brilliant because it demonstrated the use of AI in the creation of media videos. And I think this is really topical, bearing in mind what's happening for young people as well. But you use this term, digital plastics. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I've got a lot of ideas, as a lot of PhD students do. You end up with a lot of ideas that just don't make it into your thesis because you just discard them. Change your research questions about every 5.5 minutes. And at some point in 2023, I had this idea around, synthetic media, and that terminology and the implications of that, and what it looks like if you compare it to real world synthetics and plastics. And I knew already it wasn't going to make it into the thesis, so I wrote a few blog posts around it. And just this idea that, like real world plastics, these synthetic media will leave a kind of delible, like a trace online. There'll be bits of synthetic media popping up everywhere, just like there are bits of real world plastics. But also that, like real world plastics, there are positive uses, there are negative uses, there are environmental concerns in the online environment. So I found it was a useful analogy to talk about some of the concepts that I was thinking around in my PhD around media creation and text creation, but to broaden it out a little bit. It's also it's sort of connected to, there's a great Australian academic researcher, author, Kate Crawford, who's written a lot of books, but Atlas of AI, where she compares the AI industry to the mining industry.
Oh, wow.
It's a very similar kind of flavor of analogy to that.
Yeah. Oh, I'd look into that, definitely. That's really interesting, because I was reflecting on this the other day, of how we get into the mindset of a young person, bearing in mind their cognitive load visually is huge, so their notion of scrolling through and those short, sharp bursts of information that they get. And I don't think sometimes we appreciate that was such a different from what we had, in the sense that they're just sort of bombarded all the time. And that kind of, that lens of objectivity, of subjectivity, is sort of, that's what really is the crux of how we can look at that for students, isn't it? And that ability to sift what we need, and also, as you're saying, see the value in some things as well. Now, I read a post recently from Miriam Scott from the Independent Schools of New South Wales, and she had a great referral to the wild west of AI, and related, how so many schools are embracing it. Some are just going straight in, utilizing the tools that are fit for their context, while others are sort of cautiously remaining on the sidelines, just watching for good practice or whatever it might be. And she points out that whatever the stance you're taking, you can't put your head in the sand, because AI is here to stay. How are you seeing through, I suppose, what you're looking at from schools, or I suppose even in tertiary education, what is predominantly, are you seeing people who are being, stepping in with trepidation? Is there some confusion? Or is there others who are just embracing it fully? Or are people maybe going, oh, this is the magic potion that will solve all of our administration tasks? And, we had recently Gary Steger on, just saying, people don't want to do the administration, so AI is great. It's where do we fit it in an education context?
Yeah, Miriam's work's great, and I've had the pleasure of chatting with Miriam a few times, different conferences and things. Talking to her the other day about organising an upcoming conference for New South Wales, and I think one thing she's nailed there is just that really broad swathe of the way that different schools are adapting to the technology. And I think it's really jagged across Australia, so state sector, Catholic sector, independent sector, all very different. We do have the Australian framework for generative AI in K-12, which, it's a pretty sparse document. It's got a few core principles in there, but it gives you at least a general, guiding statement of how to approach AI. But I am still, I do a lot of consulting work in schools. I'm still running PD where schools are saying, hey, can you come in May, June, July and run intro to AI? And then I've got some other schools that I work with that are like, we've got this Power BI data dashboard and we're building a language model on top of it to interact with the students. And is there any advice you can give us to building a custom? It's like this totally different ends of the spectrum. What I've seen, what's most successful is where schools are willing to give staff the time to come to terms with the technology. And I think that's the key, rather than just kind of shoving it at people and saying, okay, this will solve X, Y, and Z, or, this is going to help with your administrative, whatever. Spend some time actually listening to people, what are those administrative problems? Because what I'm seeing from tech companies and AI sort of, third-party technology platforms and is this idea that what teachers want is AI that will write their lesson plans or AI that will, produce worksheets and that's
100%.
Garbage.
Yes. Yep. And
teachers want to write their own lesson plans because that's what you're employed for. That's what you're qualified for. That's where your professional expertise comes from, producing content and making meaningful resources. So we need to listen to teachers.
100%. And I think that's really important, because I was discussing with someone the other day. I said, that AI will look different for every context and the needs of the user, and it depends even within your kind of your environment. Is it directly for the system? Is it for the teaching staff, or is it for the students? Like, what is the actual outcomes that you're wishing to get from it? Because it will look very different. And you sort of made that relationship about, kind of this continuum or what a curriculum. And I think we do a disservice in the sense that we don't want AI to be a kind of a model that everybody adapts or just kind of adopts into their school, because we've kind of really minimized the effect or what it would be useful for. And we're seeing that. I mean, someone asked me about good practice, and I was saying, but it's so contextual to you. It's not like what might work for one school is not appropriate for the next school. So I think we're probably going to see, and that's simply as well because there's so many AI tools out there. That's why you can't limit it to, right, we're all going to use Microsoft for one area, or we're all going to use this. It's what's best for your context. So that's really interesting. Now, there was another blog that I read about the critical thinking in AI, which I think is a lot of conversation going on at the moment. And I love the analogy they made about Wikipedia and the hysteria that students would access to get information, and it wasn't valid and it wasn't peer reviewed. You're searching for that textbook compared to the textbook. And I think very recent last few weeks, we've seen those images on the old newspapers where teachers were boycotting the use of calculators in schools. I mean, this is nothing new. We see over time new things coming in, and the kind of, as we talked about before, the hysteria of change, which is very difficult. And we need that length of time to implement change. But there's an article in this was about reference to students using it to find answers for their homework, and whilst others were bouncing off ideas to formulate the answers to user feedback. Now, I sat with my son the other day, and he had some maths paper, and he was literally finding the answers. And in my head as a teacher, I was saying, but if you ask it to explain the answer or explain how to get the answer, then there's a rich area of learning, as opposed to, but that's quite difficult for students to understand. How could you explain this to some of the teachers of how to be effective when they're using AI, or to effective learning?
I mean, this just goes back to effective teaching and learning without AI. But on the maths front, I find this is really funny because there's such a cliche that when you're teaching maths, the answers are just at the back of the book.
Yes.
And I've had this conversation with several math faculties and faculty leaders recently, and they sort of have a laugh about this as well. But does it matter if a student has access to a tool that can give them the answer, or a technology, let's not call them tools, but an application or a product that can give them the answer, if we're just giving them the answer anyway, if we're using textbook instruction? And surely the most important thing is to, that it's the journey from getting from A to B. And I was at an all-girls school up in Perth, actually, February this year.
Yeah.
And the year 12 students were talking about how they'd used it in specialist mathematics to coach them through kind of decomposing a problem that was really complex, that the teacher had just not had the time to go into much detail in the classroom. And, a little group of students just hadn't got it. And so they went to just the free version of ChatGPT and said, okay, can you break this problem down into 5 or 6 steps and then zoom in on step 2, which is where we're struggling conceptually, and then give me 10 examples of just step 2. And you can't do that in a classroom.
No.
You don't have time. But they already had the answers to the question. The answers were sitting there in front of them. Mm-hmm. So just acknowledging that. And I think you can apply that logic beyond mathematics to all kinds of areas. There's this really interesting idea in education that we have to hide the answer from students, and then they have to kind of find it somehow.
Yeah.
And we do this with exams in every subject area. In the English classroom, in secondary education, we give them unseen prompts because, God forbid we give them time to prepare an answer. No, we'll give you a choice of 2 questions. We'll give you a choice of 2 questions. You've never seen them before, and you've got 3 hours to write about it. Go. And it's such an arbitrary task that never crops up, really.
No.
I've heard people saying, in real life, there are lots of pressure situations and things where you have to respond on the fly. And I mean, really, are there?
Yes,
I mean, unless you're working in a very, very high pressure, like working in an ER, how often are you confronted in your job with a totally unexpected scenario that you've got no context for?
Yeah.
I mean, never happens in my work.
No. And in those situations where it is high pressure, there's a lot of safeguards put in place. So there's multiple people in a team working to have that. We are aware of those and we put that in place, but we don't seem to show that in education. And it was interesting, we spoke to Gary last week and he talked about nobody says that I'm cheating because I'm wearing spectacles. So if a child needs AI to be able to, they have dyslexia or whatever it is, and they need that to help support them in their reading, no one really should be holding it against them because they haven't read the text themselves or understood it. That's just a really good tool. But we are still stuck, and that might be also a bigger picture in education. We're sometimes stuck in that trajectory of examination and that sort of end result. But what you spoke about, looking at that, about those girls using it as a coaching tool, I think that's a really exciting space we're going into. But what's really important for teachers is to know how to put those children into that space to help provide them with that kind of mentality of doing that, as opposed to give me the answer which I think it's probably be an awesome one. I'll try and work on my son with that because it's not working any other way at the moment. Now, one of the other things we talked about is about the issue of feedback. Now, I read this study about tertiary higher education students and looked at the role of feedback for them and versus, they sort of did a study on teacher feedback versus AI. And most of it was, they did sort of have a more positive lean towards the teacher. But it is a tricky one because AI is very different at, say, various developmental stages of education. So we can't say just because tertiary students did it, what that would look like in, say, a primary situation. But you've actually been doing a lot of work in this area on looking at the depth of AI assessment tools. And we are now seeing the growth of AI taxonomy style infographics that we saw with digital technologies, and that kind of depth going into it, how we can use it more effectively. But can you explain a little bit more about your work in that area, so in terms of assessment?
Yeah, I mean, so this started totally sort of outside of my PhD research. So it's so I'm sure Lucinda, my supervisor, loves that. It's a big distraction. But in 2023, I was having a conversation with Edith Cowan University's teaching and learning staff up in Perth. Yeah. And we said, there's got to be something more than just a binary kind of use it or don't use it approach. Yes. And we threw around this idea of an assessment scale, kind of with no use at one end and totally permissive use at the other. And that idea just kind of snowballed. Mike Perkins at British University Vietnam got in touch with me. His supervisor, Jason McVaugh, and Jasper Rowe, who was at James Cook Singapore at the time. He's at Durham University now. And we developed the assessment scale, the AI assessment scale, and have been working on it for the last couple of years. So it's in its second version now. And the way that we've treated it is as a design tool, really. So not an assessment security tool. You know, this colorful little scale is not going to stop any students from misusing AI. And it's certainly not going to limit the use of AI past a certain point. But what it does is it says, if you say, you know, it's either just use or don't use, you know, a little like some of the models that some universities have where all of your assessments are either totally secure or AI permitted for everything. That doesn't help teachers or students understand what appropriate use looks like. Going back to Miriam's point from earlier, that just sort of, to me, seems like the Wild West. And it's resulted in a lot of institutions have said, okay, well, if it's an important, whatever that means, if it's an important task, we'll do it as pen and paper, which is totally unfair for a huge percentage of the student population. And so we've said, look, there are opportunities to say, okay, so what type of task is this? And can I still make a valid judgment of the student's knowledge and skills, irrespective of whether they've used AI? So, you know, our level 1 on our assessment scale says no AI. There are lots of reasons why you would want students not to use AI. But that might still be discussion, debate, group work, practical work, production, whatever. And then level 2 says, you know, let's look at AI for planning, research, ideas, brainstorming, note taking, and all of those uses. And we'll say, okay, in this scenario, in this type of task, the AI is not getting in the way of you demonstrating your knowledge and skills. That's fine. So, you know, use an AI research tool, a literature review tool, or AI note taking and transcription tools, any of that stuff. That's fine, because the things that I'm assessing, it really doesn't matter if you're using the technology. And then we have a few other sort of examples, you know, level 3, 4, 5, which are all variations on that theme. And where we found it's been really helpful is just that, you know, people are looking for, students and teachers are looking for advice on what does appropriate use look like.
And that's understand that's sort of the background behind it. And it was interesting because you mentioned my alma mater. I was at Durham myself, but that was 20 plus years ago. And I remember coming out of university, and it was the time when you used to have to flick through the Times educational supplement, which came out on a Friday, to find the jobs. And you had to write a handwritten letter for every application. And, you know, when you're leaving university, you were applying for a lot of jobs. And I remember the reasoning being behind the principals or head teachers wanted to see how neat your handwriting was, which now just seems so superfluous because you would never do that now. You know, you would never take the time. And I remember also having, you know, like the line paper underneath, and you were just rewriting over and over again the same application. And it just seems bizarre. That's 20 years and so much has changed in that 20-year period. Thankfully, that's a good thing, I have to say. Now, one recent article I read from Tana Higgin was that I found, which was really interesting, was the philosophy of AI and the associated ethics, which I know you're doing quite a bit in that space. But it proposed that some questions should be things like, should I use this AI for a specific task, which we just mentioned there? Why would I use AI for this? What does it mean for myself and for others if I use AI? And framing some of these questions got me thinking about the curriculum landscape and the change, and especially in the field of ethics. And when I sort of reflected back on that question, I think as educators, those questions are really important and valid. I think as a student, you might struggle to ask those questions knowing that you've just got to get to the end result. So it's kind of how we inbuilt that into their learning of that questioning. What do you see are the changes occurring, especially with philosophy and ethics of AI?
I started, I think, in 2023 with a series of posts called Teaching AI Ethics. And that was alongside the other series of posts, which was the sort of practical AI strategies, which led into the book. So, you know, I've got one series of posts around AI ethics and then one series of posts around using the technology. And they were often in tension. You know, there's a real tension there between understanding the really complex ethical issues and also using the technology and feeling like a hypocrite, basically.
Yes.
And I don't think any of that's gone away.
No.
I'm just about to start revising that Teaching AI Ethics series for 2025. But the fundamental part of that all the way through has been, let's look at ways to teach these ethical issues within the existing curricula and the existing disciplines and the existing expertise that we have. So, health studies, HPE, health and human development, whatever various places call it. It's a great place to look at algorithmic discrimination in healthcare. The ways that mammograms are an incredibly successful implication for machine learning. The use of AI in breast cancer screening has drastically improved outcomes. But it improves outcomes much more for white women than black or darker skinned women, because most of the mammograms that have been trained on are from white women, because more white women in the US get mammograms. And so that conversation, that's a really rich conversation around the ethics of algorithms in health. Do we accept this technology that makes this process better, but only for a certain percentage of the population? And in the English classroom, we can talk about bias and misinformation. In mathematics, we can talk about the realities of things like linear regression and predictive algorithms. And I think that, there are so many opportunities to talk about the ethical considerations of this technology within what we already do in K-12 and higher education. There's a lot of chat at the moment about AI literacy. I think it's mostly rubbish. You look at the executive order in the States, and OECD's just published their AI literacy standards. And we know where that will lead, a real sort of narrowing of the curriculum and a very functional approach. We don't need any of that. We've got all of the expertise that we need already. We need to just contextualize it within that expertise.
And just when you refer now, I read in a recent article, there's a new school in the UK that is a completely AI school, which I know is quite, when we're talking about what's happening in the US. But it was very interesting because the headline referred to the amount of money that parents are paying for their child to attend an AI school, which, I could, the article was pretty good. But for me, that just highlighted that we still don't acknowledge the digital divide is now widening significantly. And there are just some children who do not have the access, and that's in our own country, do not have the access to technology that others would have. And that's a real cause for concern along the way, because we're sort of splitting the market when they get up through the education system, those who've had this and those who haven't. And so how, as educators, we put that lens on to support all learners, and what are the skills that they will all need that can adapt to change, I suppose, along the way. Now, there has been much chatter recently regarding the release capabilities of image generation, especially with ChatGPT releasing theirs. And it's sort of challenging more of the original work we saw early with DALL-E. And a really crucial question, I think, is, are we in danger of losing creativity? Are we literally reducing art to merely a manifestation of the language we input and the algorithm that's being generated? Is this an area of concern?
I think anyone who works in creative industries, arts, musics, writing, anything like that is going to be concerned about the implications of the technology, because it does. I mean, if we look at ChatGPT's recent image upgrades and the whole Studio Ghibli incident, which I'm sure many people listening will be familiar with, but their cavalier approach to obviously training on, intellectual property or creative property, and then releasing a model which can essentially compete with that out in the public market, does represent a threat to those industries. What on Monday I was at a school in Sydney, and I spoke to the music department, and they were saying, so what do products like Suno and Udio, AI music generators, what do they mean for musicians? And I said, look, the reasons that people go to live concerts are very different to the reasons people go on Spotify and put on a 2-hour playlist of study music.
Very much. Yes.
And the 2-hour study music playlist can very easily be AI generated, but
Mm-hmm.
the live music experience is very different.
Yeah.
And I think it will be, it's the same for other areas of creative industries. Text generation, image generation, language models are not inherently creative.
No.
They are probabilistic algorithms. They are best fit predictive models.
Yeah.
They're very sophisticated. They're very
Mm-hmm.
capable,
Yeah.
but they are essentially very sophisticated predictive text and predictive image.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be some human creators who use that technology
Mm-hmm.
really well in really interesting ways. There will be some human creators who totally avoid it and continue to make their own art. And there will be a lot of people who use it to create stuff which is, fairly easy to replicate and reproduce. I'm not super worried about AI destroying creativity or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think that was actually something I was reflecting on the other day. I think we're sort of seeing AI as kind of a mortal destroyer. It's going to come against us, and it's actively working against us to take away things, when actually it simply is algorithms, which are, it's not actually human form. So it's not got a personal vendetta against us. It's not wanting to take jobs away. It's not trying to take away things. We've just got to really look at it in a different context and stop seeing it as the enemy and see it as something that is going to potentially help and change things. I suppose going back to that very human element, and last question, which we always ask everyone, which is very tricky. Who was your favorite teacher and why?
Can I name a few?
Yes, I know. No one can ever give me one. It's always
as
that.
long as it fits a nice little narrative arc.
Yeah.
So Mrs. Slattery, Mrs. Furze, and in university, Oliver, first name basis. Mrs. Slattery and Mrs. Furze, they were my English teachers throughout most of secondary school.
Yeah.
And in a weird kind of, I don't know, twist of fate or something, I was a maths, science, computing kind of kid. And I hated the subject area. I love the content, but I hated the lessons of those subjects. So I didn't do very well. I think I missed one of the final exams at A level, the computing one. But English, Mrs. Slattery, Mrs. Furze, my English teachers in year 7, 8, 9, 10, most of year 11 and 12 were fantastic. And then I went on to do English and American literatures at university. So although I was sort of a maths computing kid, I did English literature at uni. And in the American literatures course, when I was on the point of failing everything, because I've never been a very good student, terrible student, school refuser, in and out of school, left, right, and center, kicked out of university almost. Oliver was my American literature tutor, and he coached me through the dissertation that I ended up writing on the beat poets of all things, the beat generation. And without those three educators, I think I would have gone down a very, very different path. And it wouldn't have been a math, science, and computing path. It would have been a dropping out of school, not going to university path. I was first in family on either side to go to university. Those were not experiences that we had, really. I grew up in Stoke, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Not a particularly salubrious environment, not not for everyone. And without those three English and literature teachers, my journey through education and then into being a teacher would have been very, very different.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful journey, and because I think it also resonates with today's teaching of young people, that we often pigeonhole children into the box that, oh, they're scientists, or that's what they're going to be, and sort of close off so many avenues. That's by nature, secondary education. I think we close off so many options. But what we do have this luxury now in, our jobs aren't set for life, and that we can explore. And it's that person who changed a direction, but also you're able to fall back into that science space and where you are today, but with confidence that you can branch out. And it, as you're saying, it's that person who it opens the door to you in another way. And I think that's the biggest thing we can probably give our students today, that, you know, the here and now is important, but it's such a big place out there. And you might not be where you think you're going to be, and that's okay. You know, we're here along the way with you. So yeah, that's a lovely part to end on. Thank you so much, Leon. And I look forward to following your journey, because it really is on a exponential trajectory, I think, of where we're going to see. And when that PhD comes to completion, if you haven't diverted off to do multiple PhDs, I guess that might be your only issue.
I've written the first draft of the thesis, which in my mind means I'm already finished. I'm done. I don't have any other work to do. It's
I know. Well, it's very interesting. I read an article today on LinkedIn about, you know, PhDs are hard, like they shouldn't be easy. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, there I was going, oh, I'm going to start my PhD, and then just went, oh, exactly like you for that reason. I just
hate editing. I'm so bad at editing and proofreading. I would rather not.
Yeah. And I'm really bad at any kind of referencing. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Get AI to do that for you. You're fine.
I know, exactly. I should have learned that earlier. Anyway, thank you so much to all of our listeners here today. What a wonderful podcast that has been with Leon. If you are interested in his work, we'll be sending some links out in part of our socials, so you can connect to Leon or see where he is next and what's the kind of work he has been doing. But also check out his book, obviously. Get that into your hands and make sure you're taking it to your leadership teams to show just the potential of AI in education. So thank you all for listening today, and we look forward to meeting again soon.